The Daily Signal is coming to you live from the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and we're honored to be joined now by West Virginia Attorney General Patrick Morrisey, candidate for governor as well. Thank you for being here, sir.
You know, it's great to be here with you. It's been an exciting convention. Look forward to talking with you.
Absolutely. Well, you had a front row seat on the floor last night.
Absolutely.
What are your takeaways?
Well, I love the fact that you have everyday Americans coming to the convention, talking about their stories. That makes a big difference. I think people should take away from this convention that with President Trump at the helm, there's going to be a lot of focus on not only making America wealthier again and making America safe again, but looking out for the middle class, the everyday American who has to struggle, who's been really hurting in this Biden economy. I think that's what you're hearing and seeing. And I'm really encouraged by what's been going on at this convention. I think it makes a big difference. So, look, I think we're on pace for a record victory this fall. The Trump-Vance ticket, I think they're going to do even better than people are anticipating. I'm excited to work with our president. If I'm elected governor this fall, I think it's going to be a great combination.
Well, you are on the campaign trail, so you're interacting with a lot of West Virginians. What are the things that you hear from them that maybe those outlets that are in Washington, D.C. don't necessarily pick up on?
Look, I think people care a lot about their standard of living. They know that the Biden economy has really hurt West Virginia, and they want people to stand up to fight that, to make sure that you're advancing our economic prowess here in the state. And they look at President Trump as someone who is going to do that. And what a contrast between Trump and Biden. And they also are looking at the governor's race. They want a governor who's going to work collaboratively with President Trump, who's going to help drive American energy independence, who's going to help in West Virginia lift up our standard of living, who's going to increase educational options for all West Virginians. We need to be known as America's education state, America's energy state, and that's going to happen because we're going to take steps that people haven't seen before. If you want to look at how we're going to get things done, look at what we've done out of the AG's office. Small state who has gone after the administrative state aggressively, and we've been making a major difference in taming that beast in Washington. We're going to keep going to keep Washington out of West Virginia's hairs. I think that's going to matter for everyday West Virginians, and we're going to grow as a state. West Virginia is going to be that shining state in the mountains, and economically, I can't think of the kind of things that are going to occur because it's going to be so good for our people.
Well, you have certainly been a role model as West Virginia's chief legal officer. I'd like to talk about some of those efforts specifically, and then also talk about what the ruling by the Supreme Court regarding Chevron deference might mean for that down the road. So obviously energy being a big area where you used the word contrast earlier. Talk about a contrast between what you're trying to do and the freedom that you're trying to preserve and what the Biden administration and the agencies in Washington, D.C. are trying to do. So walk us through some of the efforts that you've had in your state.
Absolutely. So I think for those who are listening, it's important to know that when we're talking about some of these arcane concepts, right, about the deference that you provide to these federal regulators, a lot of times people go to sleep. But the reality is the impact's phenomenal on everyone's life. I'll give a couple examples. You have to start, though, by thinking about what our constitutional system is all about. Our founders envisioned that most of the problems in our society should be resolved at the local level. That made a lot of sense, right? Because neighbors and families and communities can get together and they know the issue best. They can resolve matters. Then, of course, the founders said, well, a certain set of issues get resolved at the state-based level when maybe your local community and neighborhood, it's not a local issue, but it's statewide nature. That was designed to be most of the issues. And then a very small set of issues gets resolved on the federal level. What's happened over a long period of time is people have started to try to cut the line and go to the federal government to solve every problem known to man. That is harmful to our freedoms, and it's harmful for our ability to actually resolve problems at the local level and to actually encourage people to get involved in their communities. So over the long period of time, you've seen a real disintegration. A lot of the institutions, the educational institutions, the local volunteer associations, the churches that really were the underpinning of the Constitution that preserve those freedoms. But freedom comes with a cost. That means you have to go to work, you have to be vigilant. So That gets back to the problem with the administrative state today. For many decades, the administrative state had grown and grown and grown because a lot of politicians said, let's just go to Washington to solve every problem known to man. Well, that's wrong. So, but here's what we've been doing. We've been actually going after the federal government when they're trying to take authority, usurp authority that properly belongs to the states. You saw it in the context of our big West Virginia v. EPA case, a fundamental separation of powers case, one of the biggest in generations, where it reinforced the basic notion that Congress makes the law. It's not these unelected bureaucrats. Now you're seeing it in the recent U.S. Supreme Court case, Loper-Bright, which is getting rid of Chevron deference. And that's a doctrine that actually allowed these regulators to make decisions even if power wasn't directly and specifically provided to them. Think about that for a minute. You had for a long time courts deferring to these federal regulators even though it wasn't clear that the agencies possessed the power to regulate. And people would say, oh, well, you want the experts to make the rules. Look, we're not an oligarchy. We're not a situation where you have all these great elders who make decisions for us. We're a constitutional republic. So you have to do this the right way. And all those shortcuts that occurred over time, oh, they're the experts, let's defer to them, that was wrong-headed from the beginning. So in West Virginia and many states across the country, this has been a passion of mine since I became Attorney General in 2013. We've been trying to restore the balance in the force, the balance in constitutional governance, and it meant getting rid of that power that they'd have. Now it means if there's a small businessman who's affected by a terrible regulation, and it may be an ambiguous area law, they're not just going to be up against Goliath. They get to go after it and push back against the feds. And now a court's going to resolve it based upon what the law actually says. That's not a radical concept. That's just the way it should be. No constitutional shortcuts, because the longer this goes where you're sending more money, more power off to the feds, it constrains our freedoms. You know, we came up with the Bill of Rights for a reason, you know, back in the 1700s, and we've been moving away from that as more power is moved to the federal government. I think what's happening now, what you're seeing in the courts, is these restraints on the administrative state. It matters for our Constitution, for our freedoms, for our Bill of Rights, and that means everyday Americans are going to enjoy the many blessings of our country.
That's so true, and you articulated it so well. Thank you for your passion on this this particular issue. One of those agencies and one of those regulations that we've pinpointed recently is the mandate on electric vehicles, and the fact that we don't think that the American people understand that in a decade, the Biden administration is trying to remove their ability and their freedom to drive the car that they choose. And so it does have an effect on the everyday Americans that you talked about in their everyday choices.
Well, that's right. And if you don't think that the Biden administration is delusional in a lot of its economic policies, you need to look no further than the mandatory EV policy. And I'm really proud to say we're partnering with Kentucky on helping to lead the way against that policy, because not only is it against the rule of law, it's hugely problematic for our consumers. Well, think about this for a moment. Imagine if you're telling everyday West Virginians and Americans that you're going to try to increase the cost of their car by $10,000. Well, in West Virginia, $10,000 for a car, that matters a lot to a family of four. It's unaffordable. We can't have that. But you're not only then forcing them to change the car that they have, you're trying to do it when you don't even have a business model in place for the charging stations. Let's take the average EV. Maybe you think it could go 200 or 250 miles. Great. But in West Virginia, where you have a lot of hills and hollers, maybe that car goes 100 miles, 150. Maybe there's bad weather. Maybe there's rain, rough terrain. So it goes 100 miles. Think about this. There's no charging system set up in the state and across the country. A couple weeks ago, Pete Buttigieg was on, and it was the most laughable interview that you ever saw, because the Biden administration is making no progress in these charging station issues, no business model. But I think the worst aspect of all is that they're trying to dramatically increase the demand for electricity while they're eliminating the use of coal and natural gas, what you need to power up the energy grid. It makes no sense whatsoever, yet they want 68% of Americans to be part of this by 2032. This is the kind of lunacy that you have to fight. And I've done that as Attorney General. I'm going to do that as the next governor of the state of West Virginia. But Americans need to know that there are major threats to our way of life and to our economy, and we cannot let that happen. And these are not radical things that we're fighting against. That's why I think President Trump understands that. J.D. Vance understands that. And that's why I'm really optimistic. The contrast between the Trump Vance ticket and Biden-Harris couldn't be more clear. And I'm looking forward to, as governor, continuing these fights and helping West Virginia advance. The last thing we need is to have these mandatory EV policies, because that would be a depression in our state.
Let me ask you this. You talked about that contrast. We also know that in Trump's first term, he told his agency heads that for every new regulation they proposed, they had to eliminate two,
That's
right?
Yeah.
So what are some of the other things that he can do as president? You talked about the success in the courts, but we know the executive branch plays a role here too. So what can the president do to tame that administrative state and repeal some of the things that have happened?
Well, I think one of the best things that could be done is on day one of a Trump administration, there can be great clarity in terms of the limits on agency power. I think it's important that if President Trump goes in there, that he's going to lead by example. He did last time, of course, trying to wipe away 2 regs for every new one that's put in place. But now he has new opportunities, given the court cases with going after Chevron deference and the big West Virginia v. EPA decision. He can institute policies to make it clear that these regulators can't act, and we can begin to identify areas that we can actually retrench to return power back to the states. I'm excited. I know a lot of people talk about getting rid of the Department of Education. West Virginia can work with the Trump administration to make sure that when power flows back to the states, it's implemented the right way. You know, I'd like to see expanded school choice in West Virginia, the broadest in the country. Well, we can work with the federal government when President Trump goes in there to make it happen. In West Virginia, we want to go after bloated government. Federal government needs to do the same thing. And you can use the tools of West Virginia VPA and this recent Loper-Bright decision to say, look, the federal government's not going to just be inheriting power from the court system, and Congress is going to have to do a better job to make sure that it's clearly delegating authority to these agencies. So I think you could start to begin a taming of the administrative state, and that's going to be important. Trump can put in place someone at the OMB and at OIRA and at every federal agency designed to make sure that they're not taking advantage of the authority, they're not trying to stretch the rules, and that they're actually commanded to provide power back to the states and to the people. That's where liberty reigns supreme.
That's well said, sir. Thank you so much,
Yeah.
and thank you for your leadership on so many of these issues. Certainly, you have made West Virginia a significant player when it comes to some of the challenges that our country faces, and you've highlighted what's at stake. There is so much certainly on the line for our country's future.
Well, absolutely. I mean, we talked about the EV policy, but it applies across the board. They're trying to turn Title IX on its head and do things that are just utterly insane. They're trying to force men to play sports with women and, hold universities' funding hostage as a result. I mean, all this is craziness, and we need to call it out as that. And I know that West Virginia is going to stand firm on all these efforts to grow the power of the administrative state and change all these interpretations. And I think that's one of the reasons why you're going to see a large pushback on Biden's recent announcements related to the Supreme Court, because it's a pure political grab, and it's designed just to influence the elections in the fall. It doesn't make sense. President Trump is the right leader for our time. I think he's going to put the policies in place to right-size the administrative state, which means make it a heck of a lot smaller than what it is right now. Send power back to the states, send power back to the people where freedom reigns supreme, and we'll have proper constitutional governance. I'm excited to have the opportunity to serve as West Virginia's next governor and to partner with President Trump on all these issues. Look forward to working with him, and it's a great time in America when you're looking at what could happen in January.
Well, the Daily Signal looks forward to following what you're doing and keeping tabs on West Virginia. Thank you, Attorney General Patrick Morrisey, for spending time with us today.
This is great. Thank you.